Welcome to a new topic, reasoning. Reasoning has played a very important role in humans' characterization of themselves, and it has been an obsession of European thinkers within a specific philosophical tradition. And we met the main proponent of this philosophical tradition earlier on in this course, and that was René Descartes, the ultimate rationalist. Rationalism and reason have the same root. Now, you remember Descartes, who wanted to distrust his senses, who landed us with the philosophical problem of the cogito, and who said that the further the mind is taken away from its proper objects, logic and pure reason, the more likely it is to fall into error. This is a prejudice, obviously. This is a very strong view of what's right and what's wrong and what one should and should not be doing and thinking, and indeed what thinking is. It's very arrogant. It's also played a huge role in the construction of the human in our contemporary society. Descartes goes on, the purpose of philosophy is to direct the mind away from the confusing images of the senses towards the indubitable truths contained within the mind itself. It's also rather optimistic, isn't it? It seems to suggest that reason will sort it all out. So the first question I want you to ask yourself here is, are you a creature of reason? Is reason of your essence? There's a random internet quote from Benjamin Franklin. So convenient a thing to be a reasonable creature, since it enables one to find or make a reason for everything one has a mind to do. So if you believe passionately that you have reason on your side, you won't admit to being wrong, will you? Now, human exceptionalism seems to be inevitable, and it's also a problem. That is, we don't want to see ourselves as animals, and yet we know we are animals, and we're not quite sure what the difference is between a human and an animal. Charles Darwin landed us in a pretty pickle. Before Darwin, prior to the middle of the 19th century, we could happily believe that we were completely different from all other creatures. Now we can no longer fool ourselves in the same way. So reason was singled out as this is what makes humans semi-divine, and therefore it couldn't be found in the animal world. We have, however, in the meantime, plenty of examples of animal reasoning. On the slide there, you can see some chimpanzees from a famous lab of Wolfgang Köhler from the 1940s. And you can see chimpanzees reasoning quite obviously. The one on the left is putting two poles together to make a longer pole in order to reach something which he wants. The one on the right is building a big stack of things in order to get at something. There's planning, reasoning going on here, quite obviously. So if reason is not the thing that differentiates us from the animals, maybe it's nevertheless just kind of one thing that is peculiar to our species, like giraffes have long necks, birds fly, penguins waddle and swim, and humans reason. Maybe it's just kind of a habitual thing that we do. Here's a lovely example of a crow engaging in reasoning. This is Betty the Crow in Manchester, and she wants to get something out of this glass jar, and she has a straight piece of wire, and it's not going very well. It's like me trying to unblock a sink. So Betty has a brainwave. She takes out the piece of wire and bends it. Now she's got a hook. And that allows her to get what's inside. Now you see many wonderful and thought-provoking videos of animals doing impossible things on Twitter or Facebook. What value should you give to such things? Well, from an individual film, video clip, or GIF, you should probably infer very little. There's all kinds of reasons to mistrust a single anecdote. Betty here is in a lab. She has been studied extensively. She is well capable of reproducing this. She does so regularly, and she is a skilled tool user. So it's not mere anecdote to suggest that we have plenty of observations of something very like reasoning, working from premises to conclusions in order to further your goals in animals. Now notice that reason itself doesn't provide you with the goals. Those chimpanzees were reaching for bananas, Betty is going for a treat. Reasoning doesn't help you to single out your goals or to identify problems. One way to think of reasoning is rather to take what you already know and recombine it in order to find ways that serve your goals. Reasoning has been caught up in the business of logic. Now, logic is a means of debate, of arriving at conclusions, which we inherited from the ancient Greeks. That is, it was first given a formal foundation by Aristotle, who introduced the notion of the syllogism. This was a long time ago. This is 2,500 years ago, when philosophical debate was arising, and there was a lot of back and forth among the various philosophical schools as to how arguments should go, how to be structured. Who knows who wins an argument? And rhetoric was a very important subject at the time, and rhetoric is the art of persuasion. It's using your voice to convince someone. Aristotle was trying here to remove argument from the emotive push and pull of rhetoric. And in Aristotle's original formulation, one of the forms that he gave us, the syllogism, has three parts. A major premise, such as the statement that all men are mortal. And it's called major because it applies to a large class of things, all men. A minor premise, which you might think of as being like a concrete observation. Socrates is a man. And given those two premises, the syllogistic reasoning process deduces or reaches a conclusion: Socrates is mortal. Reasoning here refers to the transition from those two the major and the minor premise, to the conclusion. It's that logical step, and that is more or less what we mean by logic. Now, logic has expanded and been greatly developed ever since, but please note the following: reason doesn't deliver truth. It's not a truth-delivering mechanism. If the premises are nonsense, then this reasoning process will still spit out an answer, and the answer will also be nonsense. So the best reasoning deductive mechanism in the world can't really help you here. And with that, I want to introduce a sort of a three-way distinction when we talk about reasoning, because we're not always talking about the same thing. In fact, this syllogism introduced by Aristotle is an example of one kind of reasoning, deductive reasoning. That's not where I want to start. I want to start with something called inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is a means of drawing conclusions, usually about the future, based on observations in the past. So supposing you come out of your cave every morning and you look and the sun comes up in the east over there. Isn't that nice? And this has happened every morning for years and years and years and years and years. If you were asked, you would say, tomorrow morning the sun's going to come up in the east over there. That's a conclusion based on past observations. But it's not a necessary truth. In this case, it's highly likely. But we can see that it's not a necessary truth by using the same reasoning process for this turkey, who says, I've been fed every day up till now. He says on the 23rd of December. Therefore, I will be fed tomorrow on the 24th of December. This turkey might be in for a bit of a rude awakening. So inductive reasoning has this character. It's conclusions drawn from past experience, past observations, in order to draw conclusions about unseen future events, which are probably going to be the case. So even if the observations, the past observations on which this reasoning is based, are 100% accurate, the result is still only probabilistic. In the case of the sun, it seems secure. In the case of the turkey being fed, it is insecure. So inductive reasoning is quite different in character from deductive reasoning. There's another one, and this is much less well defined. So I'll have clear definitions of inductive reasoning on the screen, deductive reasoning we'll get to in a minute, but in the middle there's abductive reasoning. This was introduced by an American philosopher called Charles Sanders Peirce as a way of suggesting that reasoning is in fact far more complex than either deductive or inductive reasoning would suggest, and that what we're usually doing when we say we're reasoning is we're working in two modes simultaneously. We're taking into account the past. We've got a range of observations. We have prior knowledge. And then we consider multiple factors and we try to decide what's the best or most likely explanation or conclusion to be drawn. So this abductive reasoning is messy because it allows multiple sources of information, consideration of multiple factors, and it reaches towards what we might call useful knowledge, the best or most likely explanation. It's broad and messy. It's not as simple to characterize as inductive or deductive reasoning, but it might be a better way to describe what we do when we reason in real life in complex situations. The third one is deductive reasoning, which we met with Aristotle there. Given a set of premises, and using only rules of logical inference, which we can make explicit, and we will do in a future video, we can work to a conclusion that necessarily follows from the premises. So that syllogism about Socrates was one example of this. This is what people have in mind when they talk about logical reasoning, and they often use the slightly unfortunate phrase hard logic. That sort of suggests you can't produce a counter argument. On the other hand, deductive reasoning has this very serious weakness that it says nothing about the truth of anything. If the premises are stupid, no amount of deductive reasoning can overcome that. So, we've seen deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, abductive reasoning. I'm going to finish this video with a little cliffhanger. I want you to think about reasoning in the domain of science, or perhaps in multiple domains of science, because science is not one thing. Think physics and social science, for example. And then think mathematics, which is a very different kind of enterprise. And ask yourself which kind of reasoning is most at home in these different fields. Would you characterize scientific inquiry as being primarily based in inductive, abductive, or deductive reasoning? And what about mathematics? And what are the consequences for the kind of conclusions we can draw in different domains of science or in mathematics? We'll find the answer in the next video.